tonight to introduce you to 3 artists that we have in our current exhibition, Shifting Gaze. We have with us tonight Radcliffe Bailey, Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz, and Carlos Vega, who will be joining us shortly. And welcome all of you. We're so excited to talk to you tonight. Shifting Gaze, a reconstruction of the Black and Hispanic body in contemporary art, is an exhibition that showcases the collection of Dr. Robert B. Feldman, and Dr. Feldman has joined us tonight, so welcome, Dr. Feldman. It has been a wonderful show, and it is the last stop on its tour, where it originated at the Mennello Museum of American Art in Orlando, Florida. And it was curated by its executive director, Shannon Fitzgerald. So welcome, Shannon. I invited Shannon to lead this conversation tonight because it's very similar to a conversation that she hosted when the exhibition kicked off in fall of 2018 in Orlando. And we wanted to follow up with the show's run through several venues, and 3 years later, and a lot has changed in these 3 years. What hasn't changed is the impact of this work on audiences. In just a little over a month, we've had over 800 visitors to the show, and we've had tremendous feedback about the work, the quality of the pieces, and audiences have just been really tickled with seeing all of this work together. And it's a real testament to the eye of Dr. Feldman, as well as the curation of Shannon, that put this group of work together. It's work that really at its core talks about issues around race, issues about identity, displacement, beauty, and it's really, probing questions about who gets to create, who gets to comment on our past, who gets to invent visions of the future. And it's these really wonderful questions that we're going to explore tonight with each of these artists. So I'm very excited. I do want to let everyone know that we are open for in-person visitations. We do invite you to come and see the work in the show. We have extended the show through February 5th. So please do come and visit. Our opening hours are Tuesdays through Saturdays, 12 to 5 p.m. On Thursdays, we're open till 8 p.m. We will be closed for a couple weeks over the holiday, but around those times, we invite you to come in. And if those times don't work for you, we are always happy to open for you by appointment. So please just be in touch with us at opalka@sage.edu, and we would be happy to find a time for you to come see the work. We'll have hopefully a couple other events, and we will be invited to those throughout the show. And we're very excited to have the show extended so that even more people can see it. I do want to mention that we do have some COVID protocols in place. We are requiring proof of vaccination upon entry of the gallery. This is a college policy. And we also, of course, are requiring masks. So just keep that in mind if you do come by. So please do come see the show. Tonight's format, I'm going to introduce Shannon, and then Shannon will introduce each of the artists who will talk about the work in the show, as well as other work, other recent work that they've been working on. And then we will have a few questions posed by Shannon, and then we will introduce questions from the audience. So if you would like to ask a question, please put your question in the chat, and then we will call on you, and you can ask that question live. But we do want you to first put it in the chat so that we can call on you. And please, at any time during the presentation, you can do that, and we will make sure that those get facilitated in the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon. First of all, I do want to say another huge thanks to Dr. Feldman for joining us tonight, and to Shannon and the Mennello Museum for sharing this wonderful collection and for sharing this wonderful exhibition. It's been a real pleasure. Shannon, I'm going to read your bio. Shannon is currently the executive director at the Mennello Museum of American Art, where she curated Shifting Gaze. As a curator, writer, and educator, Shannon's research interests focus on international, national, and local emerging, mid-career, and established artists and thinkers in the production of new work, ideas, and engagement. She's worked extensively in creating exhibitions and publications with diverse artists from the United States, the African diaspora, and the Caribbean diaspora. She has served as the executive director at the Rochester Art Center in Rochester, Minnesota, and as the chief curator at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis. And she curated that museum's inaugural and traveling exhibition, A Fiction of Authenticity, Contemporary Africa Abroad. Shannon is driven by her belief in the diversity of innovative art making and how culture informs art, which impacts society and improves community. So welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Judy. So good to be here. I am thrilled to be with Radcliffe and Wanda and Carlos. It really is an honor. But Judy, I want to thank you for taking this exhibition, sharing it with your students and the whole Russell Sage community. And it really means a lot. This is an important teaching exhibition, and I feel it has so much to teach. And it's teaching me at every single venue and every time I have a conversation. And it's fills me with a lot of gratitude that it serves as a homecoming to Dr. Feldman, and it concludes in his new home. So I'm grateful for that. So thank you for all that you've done. Your stewardship has meant a lot. Wanda. Radcliffe, thank you for joining us in Miami. I know it's so busy and your time is precious. I just want.
You're coming in and out.
You're coming in and out, Shannon. Maybe you're hitting mute.
It looks like
that I've been able to make connections with 26 artists. It's really been a gift to work with Dr. Feldman, and his generosity is so important. He wanted so many people to see this exhibition, and it's come to fruition. Additionally, it's gratifying to work with artists that I've known, followed, and admired, some of them for 20 years, as in the case with Radcliffe, and certainly Carlos, and other artists that I began to know in the last 8 or 9 years, as like with Wanda. So it's really my reward to work with you. And I think everything that's unfolded in the last couple of years, all the artists in this exhibition remain in my mind and my thinking, and what you're doing now. I can't wait when you share what you're doing. I think as independently and collectively, artists in this exhibition and you here tonight really resonate with what's going on now, and you're helping us through it. You're helping us understand, and that means so much to me. I'm going to begin with Wanda. A little background on Wanda Raimundi-Ortiz. Wanda was born in Bronx, New York. She currently lives in Orlando, where we are so fortunate to have her as a professor of art at the University of Central Florida. She has her MFA from Mason Gross School of Art at Rutgers. Her undergraduate degree is from FIT in New York, and she participated in the prestigious Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. She is currently featured in a brilliant article in the current issue of Art in America with an essay by scholar Gwendolyn Du Bois Shaw. I encourage you to look that up. It's so powerful and so compelling. Congratulations, Wanda. The exhibition is so important to us who decide to live in the South as well, making connections from the Caribbean to Orlando and the Puerto Rican diaspora. So thank you, Wanda. Wanda has had recent solo exhibitions at Rollins College here in Winter Park, at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Contemporary Art in North Miami, the Bronx Museum of Art, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. She's currently in a group exhibition right in our neighbors in Tampa, the University of Southern Florida, entitled Constant Storm, Art from Puerto Rico and the Diaspora. She's been included in group exhibitions, among them the Florida Prize at Orlando Museum of Art, museum exhibitions at the Bronx Museum, Museum del Barrio, Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, Artist Space, PS1 MoMA, and she has performed at Manifesta and Performa Biennales. Wanda, welcome.
Hey, hey, how are you? Thank you so much. Gosh, I sound so busy.
You are.
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And I'm really flattered and honored to be in such amazing company. So thank you so much. And thank you to Dr. Feldman for including me in his collection. That means a lot to me. Shannon? Oh, there you go. So I'm confused. Am I talking or no?
Yes, Wanda, all to you.
Oh, okay. Gee, so I've primarily known as a performance artist, but I really consider myself an interdisciplinary storyteller, right? A storyteller, just using whatever medium I feel that's worthy of telling the story accurately. And I think the story that I talk about when I'm always talking about the struggle about being a Latina or Latinx woman in the United States. I have a long history of making work. You see that these queens that I've made, these are all me in costume. And the work, these particular queens, these reinas, each one is like anchored in a trauma that I've been grappling with. And so the best way for me to grapple with the trauma is to kind of personify it, to take it outside of my body so that I can kind of analyze all of its parts. It makes it easier for me to to understand all the different things that are affecting me. And then I create the work so that maybe someone else will get something from it too, so that it's not just me working in a vacuum, but that it goes out into the world and potentially helps someone else. So the image that we're looking at right now is an image of a performance, an endurance performance that I did called Exodus Pilgrimage, which was kind of like a love letter to Puerto Rico and a love letter to the people that survived the hurricane, those that migrated to Orlando and to other parts of the country because of the current situation, and also a love letter to those that could not leave. And so the dress is formed in it's designed as it's modeled after the Afro Puerto Rican folkloric dance, folkloric costuming, but it's made entirely from debris that my costume designer, my team, and I recovered from Puerto Rico a year after the hurricane. And then I did a mile-long procession through the downtown Orlando area, and it culminated in a big bombazo, a dance performance, an Afro-Puerto Rican dance performance at the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center. So that's just an example of something that was really troubling to me, being a Puerto Rican, born and raised in the United States, grappling with my own privilege of being on the American side, on the state side, having also experienced Hurricane Maria, but only as a Category 1, as opposed to a Cat 5. And feeling incredibly guilty that, I was struggling and suffering when we were without electricity for a week. But once I got my electricity back, so many people for months and months and months without. And and then what struck me most was how the story of the Puerto Rican struggle no longer made it to the headlines, but people were still suffering. And Puerto Rico is part of the United States. It's not an international, it's not another country. It's part of the United States. But we saw what happened in Houston when Houston had their huge flood. All energy was sent to help the people of Houston, and deservedly so. But we saw a much different response to Puerto Rico. We saw a lot of missteps. We saw, Americans for the first time heard of the Jones Act, where items cannot be shipped directly to Puerto Rico, but have to stop at an American port and then be transferred. And that created a big backlog in receiving materials to Puerto Rico, and among a ton of other issues. Adding insult to injury, throwing paper towels at people, which to me will never leave my mind. So you can see how this build up, this kind of storm of emotion. And so I felt that this was the best way for me to embody this work, right? To embody the kind of trauma, which is to put myself through a physical rigor. The dress weighs about 45 pounds, and I walked a mile in it in 90-degree weather, in the middle of April. And it was worth every drop of sweat and every blister. And so you can see that this is just, I don't want to go in through all of the pieces because we'd be talking for a very long time. But this is how I process. This is how I process my rage. This is how I process my resentment. This is how I process my sorrow, and my guilt too. I'll say that as well. So. So these are the reasons why I create the work that I make. More recently, I've been working on sculptures. You see, if you do a quick scan of all the images that are in the slideshow, you'll notice that the one thing that's runs concurrent through everything is hair. Hair is a big part in my practice, mainly because hair is a point of contention in the Caribbean community. The idea of having to straighten your hair, take the almost like managing blackness, the blackness that exists and lives in our hair through the Caribbean, especially as a light-skinned woman. And you wouldn't know it, but my hair is magnificently large. And so I always felt myself struggling to justify leaving my hair natural as opposed to like straightening it and even attempting to pass, for lack of a better description. And so I've been making work now, these sort of sculptures. They're not sort of sculptures, they are sculptures that are like mutations of the current wigs that you see that have run through my practice. And it's as if the wigs have started mutating, much like the disease that has had us all wearing masks for the last 2 years has mutated and shifted. How warped politics have completely twisted our community or shown its ugly underbelly, right? Our society's ugly underbelly. So these mutations that are occurring have been sort of, I've been manifesting them in my work, where even myself right now, I don't necessarily feel 100% safe performing in public because of that mutation in our society. I don't feel like I can safely perform without having someone decide that they're going to break etiquette or protocol and attack me just because they don't like what I said. Where that was always, that danger was always there, but I feel like people are newly emboldened to misbehave. And so I took to making objects, and there you go. I took to making objects to treating these objects as if my wigs started to mutate, as if they did not need me anymore, as if my wigs could hold space for me in my stead. And so these are the wig variants, and I've been doing drawings, paintings, sculptures, and most recently, I haven't shown it yet, Shannon, but I gotta show you. I'll text you pictures. I'm developing two new bodies of work based on this thread as well. So yeah, your girl's busy. Your girl's busy. Showing a bunch, working a bunch. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm trying to keep it brief.
Sure. Wanda, before we move, I should have asked you this first. When we talk about the piece in the exhibition, even as a starting point to what you just said, the bargain basement, and you mentioned trauma, and I don't know if you want to go personally to me, but this is so loaded with the title, the signifier, and the colonial outfit, the costuming, and your gaze. You are looking at us. You are confronting who's looking at you.
Oh yeah. So like I said, the works always come from a personal traumatic experience, and then this is my way of grappling with it. And so there's a story, and I don't have a problem telling the story, where I had a partner, a lover, who was treating me really poorly, like really, really poorly, like emotional, psychological trauma. And in the middle of an argument that I was having, where I was trying to reclaim my space, I was trying to assert myself, the person, berated me, treated me poorly, blah, blah, blah. And then tried to clean up the mess by calling me his queen. And I told him, I'm your bargain basement sovereign. I rule for less. And that was such a badass comment that I had to write it down. and that person and I have never spoken again, but I kept the title. That became the title of this piece, because that feeling of being submissive, that feeling of working for less, taking more and working for less, and always trying to rise to the occasion, having a sort of stiff upper lip and a strong back in spite of, felt very much like the way women of color are taught to handle situations. Always have to be stiffer, stronger, more resilient, and in some sort of way, like submissive and resilient at the same time. And so that really resonated with me. It, kicked the old boy to the curb, but for me, that haunted me more. I was haunted by how easily I was immediately, moved to submission, you know? And so I wanted to examine that. So I created this costume and this gown and this headpiece, working with these materials, which by the way, were inspired by a pair of shoes that I bought. I was trying to build a shirt, something around these shoes, and the colors, the pattern just worked out beautifully. To look like this sort of exotic, regal, but clearly sexualized and maybe fetishized in some sort of way, this sort of Latina royalty, this sort of urban royalty with the hoop earrings and the bangle earrings, the bangle bracelets and the animal print. And there's a performance, an entire performance that goes along with this, where I sit on a throne with a silver tray. And in some iterations of the performance, I even have handmaidens. And as long as I'm sitting with that tray, the only way that I'll even look at you is if you leave trash on my tray. Like, that's the only way that I would even remotely engage with you. And so it was interesting to put people in a situation where they had to like root through their bags or in their pockets to find some garbage to put, just so that I would look at them, so that I acknowledge them. And what I also thought was what really was my initial thought for this project was, we don't pay attention to the kind of trash that we leave in people's lives, because we are not accountable for it. We do what we're going to do. We leave whatever mess we're going to leave. We never go back to check and see if those people, that person is okay with what we've done or what we didn't do, right? Care or lack thereof, right? Negligence. But when you put someone in the hot seat and they're looking at this woman who, when the whole outfit's put together, I stand nearly 6 feet tall. And I'm basically imposing my desire for you to go get trash. People start preening. They don't want to be judged for their garbage because I'm looking dead at you while you're doing it. That was really curious to me. When I got up and I walked away, people were more lackadaisical with leaving trash near my throne. But when they had to confront me, all of a sudden, it was this strange dynamic. And so by the time I got to this photograph, which was taken by the wonderful Dominic DePaulo out in Orlando, I wanted that challenge. Like, I know you're looking at me. I'm looking at you, look at me. And that's something that has run concurrent to all of my work as well. The Chuleta videos, everything is about, I see you seeing me. I'm very aware that you see me. And I think that also challenges the notion of the, 18th century portraiture, the sort of soft, supple gaze, the delicate hand, the eyes cast away. Oh no, I'm looking at you. I see you. And when I saw the images, I was really excited about how challenging, borderline antagonizing that gaze is.
I think there's an element of surprise. Certainly you tackle art history, but you tackle colonialism and really the dynamic of looking back and forward through time, history, place, and location. And it's really a surprise that it's bargain basement through all this luxury. To me, it talks about desire and owning your desire. And I don't know, you've talked about taking on or processing rage. It seems to me in these, you take on the pain of others in addition of your own. I don't know.
I think I know that the rage that I feel is not singular to me. And so I know that women and men have felt this idea of being like used and wrung out and still feeling that they have to rise for the expectation of their partners, family, whatever. In this case, it takes the shape of a lover. But I think what I'm aiming for is connectivity with other people, with viewers, because these are very lonely spaces. Even in it's very lonely when I'm in a room full of people and I'm standing in this massive gown. Each of the outfits are a form of armor. The wardrobe is a form of armor. And I also, I've never really said this before, but I've always felt that beauty as well as humor, our beauty takes the sting out of the bitter pill, you know what I mean? And like there's something really bitter, so what I'm trying to grapple with. So I want to seduce you with, you know, the luxury, the colors, the texture, you know, and then maybe push you back a little with the gaze. And so there's this kind of push and pull. I'm always very attracted and drawn to this sort of ebb and flow. I want you to come to me, but I also want to push you back. And Chuleta does that. So many of the queens are doing that as well. Yeah.
Well, Wanda, you're talking and I'm thinking, you know, about visibility and marginalization, and certainly about women. And when we talk with Carlos, I think some of his recent work about voices and, you know, throughout history, and those who are heard and those who are not, I think is really poignant. I'm now relating that to Carlos's work, but giving voice and really asserting oneself.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about knowing that you don't matter, right? Culturally, socially, like in a big, you know what I mean? We do matter. We know we matter, but knowing that it's sort of baked into, well, them Puerto Ricans up in the Bronx, them Dominicans up in the Heights, those Puerto Ricans out in, you know, in Kissimmee, nobody's really looking for them in that way. You know what I mean? And I'm saying that being facetious. I don't want anybody to hold me to the mat saying that I'm saying crazy shit. But I'm just being very clear that we understand how our communities are perceived, how folks of color are perceived. You know, we're secondary. I don't want to say secondary citizens, but because we know we aren't. But everything, the way everything is structured, it's kind of that is reinforced, and we're shown that all the time. And you know what? It's something like, especially if you're an urban inner city young man, young woman, you know the NBA ain't really looking for you. You know that colleges aren't coming to scout in the hood. You know, so you just kind of like, you're just there trying your best among your own. And you know, and sometimes you just want to shout so loud because there's so many, you have all these things that you want to be heard and shared, and you know that your trauma is real, you know that your joy is real, but it's buried under all of this pressure. And you're like, no, but look at all of us, all these wonderful people, all these wonderful accomplishments, and no one's really looking at us. And you know, and so that just that rage from wanting to be seen and knowing it just all is so big, and you want to give it voice big time, not just like, hey, look at me, I'm a great artist, but look, I'm part of this extraordinary group of people, you know, and we live in this extraordinary pressure cooker, but there's so many wonderful things happening and y'all can't even see it. And the earlier work, I think, stemmed also from a validation of that place, not only giving voice, but a validation that we are in fact here. Right. Since then, I really couldn't care if you see me or not. I'm just coming. But I'm gonna make sure you see me.
You do, and it makes me think about some of the invisibility during the pandemic, but I won't open that up, but particularly among women and communities of color. But
yeah.
Thank you, Wanda. Thank you very much. We're going to come back and have a broader conversation, but I'm going to introduce Radcliffe now. And Radcliff Baylor was born in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and he lives and works in Atlanta, Georgia. Received a BFA from the Atlanta College of Art. His work is currently featured in 2 solo exhibitions at both of Jack Shaman's galleries right now, I think until early December. The exhibition is called Accents and Echoes, and from the description says, combines themes and forms Bailey has been engaged with throughout his decades-long practice. Foregrounding abstraction and free association, much of the new work is colorful and densely layered with symbols, railroad tracks, DNA, arrows, music, the cosmos, water, and other themes that form the bedrock of his practice, unquote. This exhibition is accompanied by amazing text from Deborah Willis and Greg Tate. So Radcliffe, congratulations. I've only seen it virtually, but it's stunning, stunning. Some of his recent solo exhibitions include an important installation of Vessel 3 at the Aldridge Contemporary Art Museum. It's included in a solo exhibition at Virginia Tech, SCAD Museum of Art, major shows at the High Museum, the Blaffer Gallery in Houston, Cheekwood Museum in Nashville, Toledo Museum of Art, a traveling exhibition from the Mint Museum, and I think this year marks his 9th solo exhibition with Jack Shaman. He's been included in really important group exhibitions, Chaos and Awe, Painting in the 21st Century at the Frist, Prospect 4, New Orleans, Southern Accents, Seeking the American South in Contemporary Art at the National Museum of Art, Duke University, Afro-Modernism through the Black Atlantic at Tate Modern Liverpool. He's included in biennials in Dakar and Havana, and his exhibition Neo Hoodoo, Art for a Forgotten Faith, traveled the Mennello Museum, the Mennello Collection, PS1, and Miami Art Museum. He was also in Black President, Art and Legacy of Fela at the New Museum. His work is in collections of over 50 museums and many private collections. Radcliffe, I'm so thrilled to have you here tonight. I would like to begin with the piece that is in the exhibition that is so powerful and so loaded with some of the things I just mentioned from your description of decades-long practice. Would you like to speak about Zion Crossing?
No. Yes, I will. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Dr. Feldman. I appreciate you for supporting us and helping us with our visions in many different ways. And thank you, Shannon. We've known each other for quite some time, and it's always nice to interact with people we've known for quite some time. You said, you talked about me growing up in Atlanta and making my art and being from New Jersey. Well, part of it was that it was a migration that my parents made that was the opposite of the migration. It was like an early migration back towards the South as an African American in the 70s. And so my parents moved to Atlanta, Georgia in the 70s. And one of my references, one of the reasons why they moved back were several reasons. My father was a railroad engineer, for one, but also on his side of the family, the reason why we ended up in New Jersey was that we were his ancestors, they were part of the Underground Railroad, and they were trying to migrate to Canada, and they ended up in New Jersey and met some Quakers in South Jersey, and there's a township that's in South Jersey that my family was a big part of. I often use the railroad tracks for many different reasons. Part of it was just dealing with at a crossroads. I'm making certain references. If you see like this image, Zion Crossing is based around an area in which my grandparents lived in Virginia, right? And there's a reference to the railroad tracks because we used to travel on that midnight train, and we were, we would catch it from in Georgia in Atlanta, probably around 7 or 8 at night, and we'd catch this train called the Southern Crescent. And it would go all the way up to Philadelphia, where we would visit family members. But along the way, we would stop through Virginia and the Carolinas. So the railroad tracks that you see on the cloth that's there relates to that. But it's also like in dealing with the memory of those who escaped during slavery and those that were considered to be ones that would always run away. And there were collars that were made for those particular enslaved folk. And so it's a cross between that. There's a rock that's in between the hat itself, and the rock was taken out of my backyard. The grounds where I lived in Atlanta it's on the old Civil War grounds. I live right next to a nature preserve, and so in my backyard there are a bunch of boulders made out of granite and rocks. And I'm kind of dealing with that, but I'm also dealing with different deities, Eshu, and dealing with someone at the crossroads, reference to blues musicians. The metalwork is also reference to blacksmiths from Charleston, South Carolina, one in particular named Philip Simmons. And also, I was just thinking about this, rest in peace, Robert Ferris Thompson. And I passed because a lot of us, we use a lot of his writings and his information that he's gathered. A lot of African-American artists, a lot of artists of African descent use a lot of his thoughts and the things that he's researched. And so this piece was kind of based on that particular place. It was called Zion Crossing. That was close to where we knew we were getting close to my grandparents' house. And that was right, above the Mason-Dixon line too. And so, and dealing with that and slavery and that exodus. So that's that piece. You want to go on to the next?
Sure.
If you have any questions, sure. So I use different materials. I started when I first started working, I studied sculpture and painting when I was in college, and I could never really make a decision between either or. They were all the same to me. Painting is just as much as about sculpture. Sculpture is about painting to me. And it's all like this physical act, this performance to it. And, I think about that, and I was thinking about Wanda was talking about the sweat and the blood, and I mean, the sweat from, moving around and carrying that weight. A lot of my work is kind of dealing with that in a different way. Often sometimes I go to places like, different coasts or ocean and collect the water from whenever I would visit the ocean. I put it in a jar and take it back to the studio, and I would mix it in with my paint and mix it in with Georgia clay, which is at the bottom of this piece. But this piece was also based around that church that's in Savannah, Georgia, where slaves that were escaping, that were hiding up under a church, where they had this diamond crossroads symbol that would come from the Congo. And it was, there were these holes in the bottom of the church, and it was said that it ventilated the church, but it was also a place where those that were escaping under, and it could breathe. And so this is a reference to that. The photographs were given to me by my grandmother. She gave me close to 400 right before she died. And so I've always used those photographs, and I finally come to a point where I've come to the end of those photographs. So I had this mission of using every single one of those photographs for a long time. And my priority really about my grandmother, as opposed to thinking about art world. So I use these photographs and I treat them as if they were deities. You can go to the next slide. This is called Wimmer Coast. I arrange it in different ways every time I show it. I've shown it in Senegal, Colombia. I've shown it in New Orleans and a couple other places. And the places which I really like about it is I can show it in different places where they have some relationships to, those who have crossed the Atlantic through a forced migration. And so I think about it in that way. It's made out of piano keys. And I thought about the piano keys in terms of the patina, and whenever someone touches the piano keys, and about background in terms of music and my interest in, hip hop, and as a kid growing up and hearing certain sounds and things coming from different albums, from families' histories, just like old photographs. I think about them kind of coming back together, almost very much like jazz music, and recreating, probably one of our own real original music's coming from States is jazz music. And so I really don't even sometimes even using the title jazz. But when I think about this piece, I think about all those different things. And this is one of my favorite musicians. It's based around two of my favorite musicians. One was Thelonious Monk, and the other one was Sun Ra. And the bottom shape is the shape of a piano, but then it's also, you know, dealing with the planets and the planets spinning around. And even one of the planets is made of a steel drum, and the center is one of Sun Ra's albums. And just dealing with different sounds. I bounce around with materials, and I'm never really like, I don't consider myself a painter. I don't consider myself one or the other. I like to make things. You can go into the next. And this is kind of like, you can kind of see a combination of all those different kind of thoughts kind of moving together. You know, same. And there's like, you know, found objects. One of the found objects is a boat that was on the bottom. This one was a boat that was made from prisons out of matchsticks. And thinking about those incarcerated, but then also I was dealing with photographs, recreating and reliving, trying to respond to the images when I'm making work. And so this was a photograph that I collected from Emory University. They had a collection of rare photographs, and this one in particular were like 4 gentlemen, and I couldn't tell exactly where they were. Were they celebrating or were they mourning? And why does this one guy actually have a band around his arm, or, you know, one has a cigar in his hand? They were mourning a lost friend. But it's a combination of a bunch of thoughts like that. It's also painted at the bottom with indigo. You can go into the next slide. And this one was the beginning of, you know, reworking those collars that were used for those that were escaping. And I wanted to kind of recreate it in a different way, but play with blacksmiths. And I'm still kind of working in that way, but in a different action. Yep. I think we passed one. Okay. Oh yes, that one. Yeah. That piece is called The Door of No Return. It was based on a trip that I took to Senegal after I realized that my DNA on my mother's side went back to Sierra Leone and Guinea. And I wanted to go to the closest ports. And I went to Dakar, I went to Gorée Island. And so I recreated this with, it's made with black sand and glitter, and it's probably about 8 feet by 10 feet. And the photograph of the ocean, which is Door No Return, if no one knows, it was the last, you know, touch of land. Those that were enslaved right before they got on the ships and were taken away. What I also did later on was I used a photograph that I actually took in Cuba. And from Havana, the photograph is of the ocean. And the reason why was because I was just thinking about, I had a combination of thoughts about a lot of different things, about the weather and how the weather changes and the currents, and how some of the boats were guided based on those currents, and how we kind of like, we're kind of seeing a bunch of things happen throughout, you know, like New Orleans and different places where these kind of incidents have happened. And I just noticed in some strange way how they kind of come back and forth. And so just thinking about those, you know, African practices and how they've kind of gone throughout different parts of the Caribbean. But also the black sand and glitter to cover the piece itself is really based on outer space as well. And you can go to the next slide. Feel free to, you know, ask me a question, Shannon, if you think that I'm going too fast. So this piece is called Nomo. This piece is called Nomo, and this is a piece that I did for Biennale in Istanbul, and it was recreated. The piece was going to be shown in a shipping yard, old historical shipping yard, and I collected materials from that shipping yard, and I recreated almost like the bottom of a ship, but for me, it's more like a spaceship. And then there's references to Sun Ra, because there was at a moment, I think it was in the 80s, that Sun Ra played and performed in Istanbul on the back of a truck, his band, and they drove through the city of Istanbul performing. And so what you have is a radio was playing the sounds of Sun Ra and then it goes by, you hear June Tyson singing, "If you find Earth boring, same old same thing, sign up for Outer Spaceways Incorporated." And so that's playing along with a friend of mine that's a musician, a bass player named Taurus Mantine. And basically I created more like a radio station. So the piece itself is called Nomo, which is based around the Dogon. And I'm just interested in space and travel. So this is my show that's up now. I sense Nichols, and it's really based on, it's kind of coming full circle with some of the things I've been doing for quite some time. It's dealing with ascending and the railroad tracks turn into ladders. I'm kind of becoming a little more minimal, but I've always felt like I have been. But when you use old photographs and things and layer them over top of those images, those were like, it was like a device for me to carry on and bring on the people who don't necessarily go and look at art. And I wanted to bring them into the conversation. That was always important for me. So on the back left-hand side, you'll see like a piece that looks kind of quilt-like. It's called Mahalia, and Mahalia is based around visiting my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. And we go up around this time, around Thanksgiving or Christmas, we would all stay within my grandparents' house and my aunts and uncles, and we would lay across the floor. And basically we had quilts, and we would lay, and my grandmother would come in and sit right on a Sunday and ask the question, is anyone going to go to church with her? And then none of us would reply. And so my grandmother would walk out the house, but right before she walked out, she would put on Mahalia Jackson. And so that's what that piece is based on. You can go to the next. And the piece on the right is called Lay Me Down. It's a bust made out of concrete and oyster shells, but it's based around a material called tabby, which you can trace through North Africa and Spain, and how it's actually made it to southern parts of the United States. And there are a lot of, like, in plantations, a lot of dwellings were made from enslaved Africans that were using that tabby and creating structure. And so that bust itself is made out of that. And on the left-hand side there's a piece, I called it Fight Song. It's based on Charles Mingus had a song called Haitian Fight Song. And it's basically like, my favorite instrument is a bass. And if my first desire before I even went to art school, I wanted to play baseball. And I always had this thought, like, when I think about, a jazz group, and I think about the bass player, bass player always plays almost like very similar, like a catcher. And he's pretty much controlling, just like the drum itself. And I always thought of myself, well, my position that I played when I was young was catcher. So there's a reference to that. And then also at the top of it, you have a figure that's from the Congo, that's right on the top of the neck piece itself. So you could go to the next. So I think that's the question.
Right. Radcliffe, so I think the complexity and simplicity that's balanced in your work is just so powerful. The virtuosity between music and the figure, and how the body's literally present in your photograph work, and then suggested, like in the Inkisi, the body of the figures, the cavity of the figures. And it's just this push and pull between abstraction and representation across hundreds of years. Like I feel it's marking the movement of peoples.
Thank you. I'm always trying to deal with my scale too. I feel like I'm 5'8", weigh 150 some pounds, and I want to make big things, and I want to push my scale to the limit as well. And sometimes, there've been older works where I've actually like just measured my scale and used those particular inches to make pieces those exact inches. But that's a little bit in there, and then there's a part of me that deals with performance, but that performance part is, for me, it's a situation that happens in the studio 2 or 3 in the morning, nobody's around, it's quiet as can be, and I am trying to figure some stuff out, and I'm praying, and I'm trying to figure out and solve my problems, or think of the problems that we deal with on a daily basis. And even like with my show that's up right now, it's really like, it's a lot of work that's just based around that pandemic time of being to yourself, isolated. It was probably the most beautiful time I had, because the world seemed to slow down and stop for me and check itself. And so I checked myself, and I had to lock myself in the studio and focus. And that was something that was very important for me right now at this point of 53 years old.
I just feel that they're like portals. There's like portals to infinity, to space, to water, and you're mentioning currents, and there's this constant portal and transporting that occurs, I think, through the physical body and your work. If that makes any sense. Very powerful.
I think that we're all like vessels, and things come through us. And
Right.
yeah. And I'm always like, I'm fascinated with traveling by land, by sea, by space, unknown places. I'm curious as hell to know about stuff, But yeah.
Mhm.
Hey, Carlos.
Hi. I would like to say one quality of your work is how open-ended it is for interpretation, because the way you layer portraits of people implying their soul, and then the materials like the reflective material on the glass, I think 100 years from now they will be read differently.
I agree.
What do you think?
I agree. No, I agree. Yeah. And some of it, when I think about the way I use it, my intent in the beginning was really like the reflective qualities of it was really based around Haitian flags. And I was basing around Haitian flags and, figures from the Congo with the glass stomachs and mirrors, but I guess when I put it together, it's not that obvious, and which I like a lot. And I actually prefer not to. I wish I didn't, I wish we didn't have to explain our work. I feel like sometimes we take some of the well, I don't want to use that word, take some of that part of it out. And, I still want to, when I think about, I wish that I could have the qualities of African art where it was, you didn't know anything about the story and the history of it, but you felt like this presence of the object. That's what I wish I could catch without feeling as if I have to explain it.
That's the flash of the spirit you just talked about.
Yep.
Ferris Thompson.
Yeah.
Thank you, Radcliffe, so much.
Thank you.
Carlos, hello.
Hello, Shannon.
How are you tonight?
It's a thrill. I love to hear the two presentations. It's really powerful, and you always learn a lot. Thank you very much for organizing it.
Oh, well, are you in Miami?
No, I'm in New York.
Okay.
And and happy to be part of this evening.
Well, welcome from New York. I'm going to briefly introduce you. Carlos was born in Mennello, Spain. He lives and works between New York City and Kinderhook, New York. It makes many trips back to Granada, Spain. He studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, at the University of Fine Arts, San Fernando, Madrid, Spain, and the University of Fine Arts, St. Isabel of Hungary in Seville, Spain. I'm going to start off with a recent review I just read of a solo exhibition at Jack Shaman. I think it's from Harper's Bazaar, and they stated, Vega's work takes inspiration from moments in history, such as the brief period when Christianity, Judaism, and Islam coexisted peacefully. References from his personal history, such as traditional lattice screens found in his native Melilla. And I pulled that because it's so concise with many of the things you explore, but I think it addresses the piece in Shifting Gaze and many, many other things, your trees and iconography as well. The conflict and balance, political tension, but call for harmony that I find. Carlos has had many solo exhibitions globally, especially throughout Spain. He had a recent solo exhibition at Orlando Museum of Art right here in Orlando. It was stunning.
Yes.
He has now had 8 solo exhibitions at Jack Shaman Gallery in New York and at the school at Kinderhook. He's been included in important group exhibitions, among them this year, Subliminal Horizons at Alexander Gray Associates in New York, Self-Portrait of Artists in Their Absence at the National Academy Museum in New York, the Havana Biennial, Black Panther, Rank and File, really important exhibition at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. Carlos, thank you for being here, and welcome. You talking about first, you have 2 works in the exhibition, a stunning large-scale work, and then a very intimate print. Let's see. So Just Discovered, Carlos, would you share this for us?
Just Discovered, it's one of my favorite pieces. I'm the son of somebody in the military, so I grew up doing practice target and running around, picking the lead pieces from the shooting gallery at the end, putting in my mouth, and then going home and melting it with my sister and making splash of lead on the sink full of water. And then in art school, I also my concentration was in printmaking. So that's another double whammy with this piece, because the subject on the opening on that explosions are stamps. And stamps were equivalent to money. It was the currency, it was the things about society that they were most important, the basic fundamentals. At the beginning, it was about kings and queens, and evolved over 120 years history to have been also a plethora of wishes and aspirations and accomplishments. So I fell in love with that thing about telling, making little windows, precious little holes to see this other micro narrative. But in this one, it goes to a mythical search for the land of abundance, somewhere else where the world will be perfect. It's a narrative as old as humanity, looking for that prosperous land. And lately, there was the search for other planets with equivalent qualities as Earth. And there is the diagram of the perforation of the punctuation on the metals are the Eagle Galaxy, somewhere that the Hubble telescope have found a planet with the conditions of Earth. So I decided to reorganize all this collection of worldwide stamp by color and to play with the idea of the spectrum of light and talking about that utopia and coming to realize that we really are that wonderful generation. We are better than our parents. Our parents were better than our grandparents. And it's a call of optimism. We are in the better world we could be. And then this other, I'm gay, but I love women. I love the way they think. It complements my life. It's so important to, the world will be better with women with more power, I think. So this piece was a commission project I did at the Rocking Horse with a collection of wonderful women from antiquity to today's day. And it was a lovely little opportunity to do more than one, because normally I put months of work and you just get one piece, but there were 20 something copies. So I hope that everybody find the joy of all those women who have been opening gates for all of us.
I see this in your new work, which I do have a couple of images too, of your new paintings of women throughout history and space and religion.
Yes. These are the same, playing with the whole idea of that universal moment of confluence and playing with what Radcliffe was talking, the reflective material. And I think in the reflective, that's something wonderful too. It brings the viewer into the picture. And these are the memories of my past. And also I love artists like Goya. I love observing, and as our previous presenter was speaking about the subject of being looked at, the object of observation is looking at the viewer, and as part of that Baroque vocabulary of who is looking at who. And this is the beginning of my ladies. This lady is part of my childhood pantheon of women's. It was supposed to be a very scary woman to be avoided at night, because she wanted to seduce, but at the end, she wanted to kill. Anyway, it's a North African tradition. That's what it is. And then I did the series of my goddesses. Some of them, the one in the left is Pachamama, kind of nurturing the world. The one in the right is a friend of mine, but highlighting the role of women in antiquity, how they were the one educating other women, and the importance of the transmission of knowledge through their female lineage, and how important it is. We are all result of a mother telling us things. The one in the left, it's a figure that we all confront on the streets, the homeless, the mental disease. And sometimes it makes me think how the hermit of the past, they may have been also considered homeless by some people, and how that divinity inside that perturbed person is an expression of something magnificent. That life has its own divine purpose, and there is a God living inside that marginal person. And I like to remember that. I think it makes me more aware of service.
Mhm.
And then the one in the right is it was the beginning of a whole series of work. And it started having a evening with one of Bob Feldman's friend in Orlando, who lost a daughter, and how this woman has been transformed by that loss. And I thought about the divine plan and how these terrible losses sometimes make the most amazing transformation in the world by this clock of suffering and honoring. And so that one of the umbrella was the beginning of the last body of work that I exhibited last May with Jack. And there were these mothers in mourning, and how making an homage to those kids who were killed in schools by random acts of violence, and how all those mothers, they've been transformed. How I believe in that heroic journey of the soul, and how maybe those kids offer themselves to come to this world to make to try to battle the tide of violence. I want to keep living inside the myth of this heroic journey of the soul.
I think there's two more from this. Yeah.
And one thing about this, the funny thing is that I worked with lead for around 15 years. And I'm really enjoying it. It took me a while to transition to paint, but I'm enjoying discovering new techniques, taking it lightly, taking it also very ambitious. And I don't know, I'm in love with we are so fortunate artists, because there are moments of wisdom when, you are about to touch something. And I don't know. I think we're very fortunate people, all of us. And this was a large piece. It's about 4 meters long by 7 feet tall. And it was a big composition with all these mothers. I don't know. I don't know if I communicate the meaning of my intention, but it's all I can do. It's all I can do.
Well, it's exciting to see the movement from these very heavy materials and this lightness, despite the content or the narrative, perhaps the storytelling that you're talking about, and the burdens of motherhood and the knowledge of women that they possess. It's exciting trajectory and shift for you, Carlos.
Thank you. And thank you for the support.
I saved a quote from you that I held on to, and I'm just going to read it quickly because I think it's a nice way to move on to that. So Carlos, you said to me 3 years ago, I was asking about possibility and optimism, which you also shared here. You said, quote, "I like the idea of humanity going through a process of unstoppable enlightenment."
I believe so.
Are we all doing that now? Is it possible that we're being enlightened the last couple of years?
I do think so. I believe in the divine providence, that enormous force that with all the turbulence and everything will guide us to the most beautiful place. I think there is an army of people that feels that way. I think it's not talk about, but I think we are living in wonderful time. The Renaissance was also a very turbulent time, let's not forget. And the Enlightenment too. That's how things happen.
It is, and I think Wanda's charging through with that enlightenment. She's charging, and Radcliffe's making us reflect and ponder. Well, thank you so much. I'm making notes because I'm learning so much. I appreciate all that you've shared. Judy, I welcome opening it up if you have any questions from anyone attending, or can talk among ourselves, or I certainly can ask more questions, but what do you think, Judy?
But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please drop them right in the chat and we can make sure they get asked. Or if you have questions for each other or comments on each other's work while we're waiting for questions from the audience.
I posted in the chat that I really love your positivity, Carlos. I remember that being infectious in our previous talk together when we sat in Orlando, and I'm glad that has not been extinguished, and for reminding us that the Enlightenment and the Renaissance were incredibly turbulent times, and we see what came out of that. And like the Puerto Ricans say, lo que no mata engorda, right? If it doesn't, it makes you fat. And and then so I think like what Radcliffe was saying, that during the time of the shutdown was actually really potent for me, creating and that quiet, that solitude, even though it was like a scary time, but also that quiet was like a moment of reflecting, and so hopefully, I don't know about y'all, but I see obviously, Carlos, your work has changed considerably, and Radcliffe, I'm guessing, but my work has changed a whole bunch, and I'm really excited to see what enlightenment has come through the chaos. And certainly, I felt like I've been charging this whole time, and now I'm feeling more like the sage on the mountaintop, more than than the woman carrying the sword from my. If I turn my camera off, you'll see what sword I'm talking about. But I don't feel so much like that, charge anymore.
I do, we just had a recent lecture here from Martin Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology. And he did this question to the students in the audience. And he said, how many of you believe that the future is going to be better than the present? And about, 20% of the audience raised their hand. And he said, that's actually 80% of people in America will say that the future will not be better. But if you ask the same question in China, 75% of people will say the future is going to be better. It's a very uniquely American thing to be so pessimistic right now. And I just thought that was such interesting data. And I'm curious, Carlos, as such an optimist, do you feel sometimes that you're in the minority, especially these days, in being so optimistic about human nature and the future?
I don't feel pessimistic at all. I think anybody it's not optimism. When you see the stamps, it's not just now. It's been 140 years of being conscious, being aware of the needy, being aspiring for clean, for perfect earth. I think it's just the media. It's also horror movies have always existed. In the Middle Ages, they were about painting of beheading and things like that. We are all thrilled by scary things, but it's not true. It's not true. It's these young people in their 20s, they are going to be amazing. And there is also, if I want to be totally idealistic, this is what it scares me. What I would like to become is somebody who awakens people to be aware about the passenger of the human experience, the soul. We all have this silent passenger who is wisdom, and it's just, being inside of us, and it will go back to the source. But this is not our only incarnation. This is an opportunity. Time has happened to us. We are in this crossroad, and I believe that the young people, the being aware about the spiritual dimension of us, it's really what is going to transform the world. Confinement transformed the world in 10 days. Something can happen.
That's great. Thank you. I see Joan Gruben has her hand raised. Joan, would you like to ask a question?
Well, yeah, and I just want to say I just so appreciate this presentation tonight. Wanda and Carlos, I didn't know your work. I'm really interested in learning more about it. Radcliffe, I saw your show at the school. Was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? That really knocked me out. That was such an incredibly powerful show. So thank you for this tonight. It's and I can't wait to come to see the show, because I live not too far away, and I'm going to make my way there. For some reason, I was thinking about poetry when I was listening to all of you, and this is sort of a weird question because you're all artists and I am too, and but I just wondered if any of you have a relationship to poetry. I think it emerged in all of your work, and maybe Radcliffe, because I'm a little more familiar with yours. That just the thing about form and silence, somehow poetry, I just think of, is almost about what you can't say, like trying to say what you actually can't say, but pointing towards something. I'm not really making any sense, but it's just what came to my mind. So I just thought maybe it's a prompt to see if anybody has any deep relationship to poetry, as I do.
Wanda?
It's funny you should call me out, Radcliffe. I feel like your chuckle was heartfelt. I like that. I don't think I paid attention to my work as kind of a direct line to poetry until I was in a residency at the Atlantic Center for the Arts. And I kind of snuck into these poetry sessions with the New York State Poet Laureate at the time, Marie Howe.
Oh, I know her. Yeah, she's amazing.
She's fantastic. So, you're first taken by this woman and this shock of hair, right?
Yes,
see, hair. I told you the hair again. It's always with the hair with me. See, but I was there for an artist residency under the tutelage of Pepon Osorio. But I kept gravitating to the poets and listening to her talk about the editing process of poetry, which made a lot of sense to me. It spoke to me in the sense of like what she believes in, like stripping down and stripping out anything that's extraneous so that you craft the most beautiful sentence, and that every sentence should be as beautiful as the last one. Right? And so there's this loneliness and starkness to the work that she was making and reading from. And that I think is what has boiled down my performances to this, to the sort of potent reduction of feeling, right? The work that I make can be very grand, right? At least lately has been very grand, but it's solitary work. And I have to sit in all of the feelings that I'm going through and edit the extraneous and pluck out the things to make the most beautiful visual imagery that cut right to the core of the issue. And so to that end, I feel that poetry has been the crafting of the story in a poetic way, the crafting of the visual, the crafting of even a line. I teach drawing classes at the university, and in my slideshow that was like zipping by, there's drawings and stuff, and you can look me up. I'm not hard to find. But when I talk about drawing, when I talk about painting, when I talk about making performances or any other gesture, I talk about crafting. I talk about articulation, visual articulation. I tell my students that each line that you make should be as beautiful as the last line you make. I tell them that each line, each mark that you make is a letter in your vocabulary. And the more articulate your lines, the more eloquent your speech. You see? And so, and that, I want you to not just sketch and dilly-dally and move things around. I want you to really make a conscious decision about what you're putting on the page. And so there's that connection about crafting, not the actual, tactility of it, but like a deeper, the connecting from the heart to the mind, to the hand, to the viewer. And I think to that end, the way poetry has that, like that straight arrow that pierces right through you is what I'm looking for in my work. One of my favorite poets, if you've never heard of him before, who is now, I think, the current poet laureate, is Willie Perdomo. And Willie, or in English, Willie Perdomo, right? And Willie Perdomo, he wrote this book where a nickel costs a dime. And that's just all these amazing poems of living in the streets, right? He has this fantastic poem called Nigerican Blues, which is just extraordinary work. You can see him do his spoken word stuff online. And I was actually, now that you mentioned, I think about it, I was flanked by Nuyorican poets. I did work at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. I've done performance poetry. I've performed the works of Julia de Burgos, the famous Puerto Rican poet. And the running thread is this sort of beautiful language and this creating, this imagery with words. And so, the work is kind of like it's definitely certainly rooted in that way of how do you craft the most beautiful line without any extra, just pure reduction. So that's my 2 cents. And I never thought about that before outwardly, but thank you for asking.
There used to be such a relationship between poetry and visual art, and they work together so often. I mean, I think what you're talking about is the act of compression. You're sort of compressing to make something that you sort of take it in, not in time, but in a gulp.
Or in my case, sometimes a shove.
Well, yeah.
Eat it. Not always, but sometimes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Radcliffe, I'd love to know if how you would answer that question. I think of your work, I think Bob said it in the chat, as so incredibly efficient in that, I mean, like the Zion Crossing piece in the show, it's 5 objects and it's just carries the weight of a soul of so much history, and it's just so beautifully succinct. But I'm curious, same question to you about poetry.
Well, probably one of my favorite poets would be Amiri Baraka. And I've always loved his poetry. It's just the way it was almost sharp as a razor, and it was just there. And there was no chaser, and it had something about it that, when I think about poetry, I'm often thinking about jazz musicians. be it, of course, I just mentioned like hint towards Thelonious Monk, but you know, there's something about the silent part of it that the words come through the instruments a particular way in which I wish that I strive to have the same rhythm, action come out of my hands. And I think about that as more like, you know, would be my weapon of choice in a way, to be able to, it could be very, it could, I mean, you know, very minimal, you know, like roomy, I like all kinds of things and all kinds of sounds, but silence. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Now we have another question for Radcliffe from our student docent, Jadiana Conieta Whitfield, who is one of 3 students who signed up to be a voluntary docent for this show. And Jadiana has been an exceptional docent. She works at the gallery and she's so thoughtful about her own work as a young artist. But I'm excited to hear what she has to ask you guys.
Hi, sorry if my Wi-Fi lags. But I just want to say first and foremost, thank you to all the artists that came and actually sat here and talked to us and really just gave us a more better understanding on the work. I seen a lot of themes and connections between my work and your guys' work, and it kind of was like reassurance and almost like a reminder that what I'm doing and what I think is important or my voice is just, you know, it's just as valid. So thank you for that. So my question is kind of like a 2-part question. So sorry if it's a little long. So I said, your comment of your family kind of doing a reverse migration really stood out to me. When like usually when you think of Atlanta, I mean, yeah, you think of the South, but there's also this kind of idea of a Mecca that comes out of it for Black people. And I guess my question is, was there any drastic differences living in New Jersey versus Atlanta or vice versa? And did that have any effects on how you perceived yourself growing up? And my second part is, you seem to have like a lot of information on your lineage and your family history, which some Black Americans, including myself, tend to have a disconnect with, obviously because of slavery and systemic oppression. What does that legacy mean to you, and how do you honor that? And how did that influence the way you go about your practice or your process?
All right, so Atlanta, yeah, it was the opposite because my family in New Jersey lived in rural Jersey and lived in very country part. When you look at, you know, the tags and says New Jersey Garden State, they literally lived, you know, amongst acres. My grandfather farmed asparagus. And so what my parents wanted to bring me and my brother up was in a totally different environment because we were kind of isolated. All we had was ourselves. And when I say we had ourselves, that I had about 10 family members living on the property that my grandfather owned. And so we all cousins and uncles and everyone built houses on the same street. So that was very beautiful and very close, but we didn't have too much access to the world. And so my mother was a school teacher, but she was teaching back in the time when we were dealing with segregation, but she wasn't teaching just African-American kids in New Jersey. So she had a whole different outlook on the world in a way. And so when coming to Atlanta was really based on just the things that were happening in Atlanta with African-American doctors, businesses, HBCUs, Morehouse Spelman, Morris Brown, Clark, Atlanta University, all those schools close to one another. We lived like maybe 5 minutes away from living in Southwest Atlanta. But I don't have any other family members there besides my mother, my brother, and my father. And so that's a whole different thing. So it was almost like we lived in this one circle, which we call Atlanta, but you drive outside of Atlanta, it's a whole different environment. I don't necessarily feel comfortable outside of that circle. Atlanta has kind of been like that safe spot. And I just, as an artist, for me, it was, it's not for everyone, but it was a certain level of comfort to be able to be close to family members and make work and try to solve that problem of they are my audience. Now, and then, we're just dealing with this history of African-American mayors that have gone through the city of Atlanta, and we just elected one now. And, I've known all the past mayors, just, at a very close range, because we all live in the same neighborhood, be it like the people like Andy Young, be it like Hank Aaron lived in the neighborhood. They're all, you could see them, and that was, made you feel very good, because at the same time you see them at the grocery store, but then you see them on the news, and then you see them doing things in the community. And the last part of your question was, what was that? What was that part? I can't remember.
So I said, hold on, let me get back to it. I said that you seem to have a lot of information on your lineage and family history, which some Black Americans, including myself, tend to have a disconnect with because of slavery and systemic oppression. What does this legacy mean to you? How do you honor that? Or how did that influence the way that you go about your practice and your process?
Yeah, that was I blame it on my mother. I blame it on my mother's great aunt. I blame it on my grandparents. They were often, they would share information. My grandmother just had an old photograph. She knew Bethune-Cookman. They knew a bunch of different kinds of people. And, they even knew the wives, artists. The Barnes Foundation, my great aunt used to go to the Barnes Foundation. So I kind of had art kind of thrown at me in a different way. And I didn't realize until later on in life, really after college. But having that information and being passed down, I thought that was just very important. And it doesn't really happen as much these days as it did back then. We don't have that many, we didn't have that many distractions as a kid. I think that we have all these distractions where these kids are on these phones and they don't go outside. They don't, interact the same kind of way. I don't know. That's what I think it is. I think it's about the way in which we interact with each other. We don't really do that much anymore. I can't remember the last time we had a family reunion. Right now, it's almost like we create family reunions amongst our friends. So.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Jadiana, you had a question for Wanda as well.
Yes, I did. Okay. So I noticed that
I see it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
It's all
I
good.
have
we could just talk, girl. We could just talk, girl. It's cool.
Okay, no. Yeah, I'm a talker, so growing up in the Bronx during the 70s and the 80s and so on, which were times that a lot of great things culturally occurred, but also pretty traumatic. How did your environment affect you, both positive or negatively, as an adolescent or a young adult? Did you struggle to embrace your upbringing, or is it something that you always had pride for? And my second question is, as a Latina or Latinx artist, did you ever question or experience self-doubt as an artist in these spaces, or the art world that is, primarily white? And if you did, how did you move past that? Also, another PS to that question, what was like your first introduction to art? And I guess it doesn't really necessarily have to do with just visual art, in any aspects of that. yeah, who were those people for you that kind of like let you know, like, okay, this is kind of what I want to do?
All right, I got you. See, I can keep track of your questions because I can see it in the chat, so I can go pop. All right, so to answer the first question, so living in the hood in the 80s, yeah. And my mom had me really, really sheltered, because it was so crazy out there. You know what I mean? I saw my first dead body in the street when I was about 8. So there was like a rash of people being pushed off of roofs, and it had just happened. So I didn't see the body. I saw the white sheet and the cops around. I was on my way to go buy candy or something or play video games. I just was like, and there's no question what that is. You know what that is, that young age, right? And so my mom tried her best to shelter me, but you still see what you see. You know what I mean? Because, my mom's chain got snatched in front of me. Getting off the train snatching, purse snatches. Gosh, when I was in college, Amadou Diallo was shot, and that was only one train station away from me. The 41 shots by the police. So did it form me? I had no choice, right? You learn, you walk. Everything you do is a walk, is an act of survival. It's an act of daring. It's an act of like, shit, if what you know what I mean? It's like you have to have like this armor of bravado just to do basic things, right? I had box cutter put in my throat just because I looked at somebody sideways on the train. They didn't like it, and they put a box cutter to my throat. So 9/11 happened. My God, like we could go on and on. So I think what's thematic in my work also is resilience. And I know that because of how we lived. You keep showing up, right? For all the things that I've seen, and that's just a slice, and I had it good. You know what I mean? Both my parents stood together, my father, until my father passed away. I have older siblings that help us figure it out. I could have been in the shelter system. I could have been in foster care. I had it good. I had it real good. You know what I mean? I never wanted for food, things might have been tight, but if it was tight, my mother never let me see it. So like, you know what I mean? I understand that kind of shelter is a privilege. Not that I lived a privileged life, but that it was a privilege to not have to sleep soundly as a baby, in spite of all the things, and to be taught to keep showing up. And that's what the hood showed me. You keep showing up. And so, yeah, I could have cowered, but all it did was make me stronger. Like 9/11 really was a catalyst for my art career. Like for real. I always was creative. I went to art high school. I was drawing as a little kid. My brother used to draw. He went to music and art. I went to music and art. My sister went to music and art. My brother was the other one, was accepted to music and art. There's a legacy of creatives in my family. So there's no lack of creativity around me. I'm the only one that really pursued it as hard as I did. And then my nephew and my niece certainly followed afterwards. All that to say, when 9/11 happened, and I'm like, I was spared, right? I wasn't down there for whatever reason. Could have been. We lost people, brushes with death, the smell in the air, the soot, the crate. I had no excuse, not one, to follow this dream. If there was any doubts that I had that I needed to be an artist, or if I was worried about, and this is going to tie into the second question that you asked about being doubtful as a Latina. Up until that point, all I thought about was like, how do I make art that white people will buy? Because ain't brown folks buying no art, at least not that I saw, and I'm a light-skinned girl, like I'm an in-between. I'm not black enough, I'm not white enough, I'm not spick enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not that, I'm too much. So always being in this weird nether space, I never knew where I fit in, but I knew I wasn't white. You know what I mean? And that was clear. And so I spent so much time trying to navigate, well, how do I make art with a capital A? And then 9/11 was like, cut it out right now. You're just gonna make stuff. You're gonna make it happen, and that's it. That's all, right? Because I got a chance to. I got another. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the first time I made work that was solely and directly guided by healing. I started doing like putting candles out in the street and doing like chalk murals. And I just went out in the street and I grabbed a bunch of paint, picked a random wall, painted a 9/11 memorial, on the side of a store, like a big electronics store. And people came out like, yo, yo, yo. And I'm like, I didn't care. I just was painting. I painted angels. I painted this. I painted that. I painted ribbons. And then Tito Puente died. I went right back out on that wall. Nobody stopped me. I thought the cops would show up. They brought me a sandwich. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just was doing what I had to do to heal the community. And I had put a lot of excuses. Oh, I'm not hood enough to do throw up work. I'm not this enough to do whatever. I'm too Nuyorican to be picked up by a gallery or to be showing art. I didn't even know how to do it. I didn't have a mentor. What I had was cojones. And that's coglione in English, but coglione is Italian. But you see what I'm saying? You're picking up what I'm putting down. I see you chuckling. And so you see what I'm saying? So like, again, goes back to the hood. The hood teaches you to show up anyway. You just go. And then as Chuleta happened, if you haven't looked me up yet or like Google it, I started making these videos. I started making these videos much later on, like around 2006, where, in the wild west of YouTube, when there was no rules. And I just threw my hair in a doobie and I started talking shit about the art world because nobody cares anyway, right? And it was just this kind of, once again, this thing about needing a voice and putting it out there. And who was going to come get me? Who's going to come to who? Nobody was, because nobody even cared, right? Art critics don't go past 96th Street in New York. They don't go, maybe now they will, but they never did before. So it's like all the shows I had were in Spanish Harlem and the Bronx, maybe somewhere in the armpit of Brooklyn, but not any place where real art was happening. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to just say what I got to say. And that's the end of it. I'm going to call it out, and I'm going to call it out in the most ratchet way possible. And I did. And I did that for from 2006 to 2013. And then the work changed because I left New York, and then I changed, and my world got real quiet. And when the world got quiet, and all of a sudden I went from living in the hood, like the last place I lived was between 2 methadone clinics and a Pentecostal church and a Korean fish fry, like by the train. And all of a sudden I'm in a suburban, dripping with Spanish moss, and I'm driving in a car, and I've got a steady paycheck. My class changed. Now how everything is quiet. So all I'm dealing with is like processing like years and years and years and years of trauma. It's like a post-traumatic stress. You know what I'm saying? I'm in South Beach right now, and every time I go outside, I'm like, ooh, like it's all New York is coming out of me again. So, but it's a very long answer, but this is why I work the way I work, because it's all of it is in there. The fear of not being accepted, the needing to be validated, getting pissed off that I'm expecting someone to validate me because I know that validation doesn't mean anything, right? And countering that in my own practice, pumping myself up and like using these alpha female characters to beat my own chest, to build up the kind of courage it takes to stand in front of people and say, you need to see me. You know what I mean? And so that, you're like, what's up? I'm gonna go get this. That's what I do to myself with the work. It's just like, again, I said before, it's a very lonely process. I'm in my head a lot, and I'm observing people a lot. I'm watching the news. I'm watching how people move. I'm watching all kinds of stuff, and I just put it in the work. And since I've got 48 years of not giving a shit, here we go then. I guess we're gonna do it. I guess that's just how I'm gonna tackle my career as well. But poetically. See what I'm saying? Because it's the beauty that makes people eat the bitter pill. Got it?
Yeah. No, yeah. Thank you. I felt all of that. That was very beautiful.
Oh, every piece.
Right.
I recorded because I won't remember what I said tomorrow.
Right. No, I mean, I can't be with, not that I can't be with people like you, but like I would just talk and talk and talk if I was like with you face to face. So I really do appreciate that.
Follow me on Instagram, girl. I check my Instagram.
Okay, yes, I will definitely do that.
I check my Instagram. I'll answer you.
I don't know if you see my comment where I said that you were the blueprint for the influencers that we have now.
Whoop.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. Thank you, love.
Thank you, Jadiana. We have another question from, is it Atto? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, and I would love to turn it over.
It's Atu.
Atu. Hi, Atu.
Thank you. I'll keep it short. I respect all y'all's time, and thank you so much for doing this. I had a chance to see the show briefly at the Opalka, and it was a gorgeous show, and it reminded me of just how, even though it wasn't as large of a space as I thought it would be, they were sharing space in a very beautiful way, and getting to watch people move through the space and then return to spend time with individual pieces was really like a nice dance to watch. But I just wanted to ask, and if any of y'all wanted to share, I've heard y'all talk about the making at different times and being very present in the practice, especially going through quarantine and stuff. And I just didn't know if I'm curious as to if there is something that you've added into your daily life that is outside of your artistic practice that you wouldn't mind sharing, that you do as a form of leisure to kind of heal from this very fully immersive. All your practices seem super immersive and like hardcore and kind of stressful. And I was just curious if there's anything that happened recently during the quarantine that, I mean, like for me, I try and take time to put lotion on my hands. You know what I mean? Just some little stupid shit, but whatever. I just didn't know if there's anything you've added to your daily routines that you do for yourself as a form of leisure. And thank you for this conversation. It's beautiful.
All right, I'm gonna jump in real quick. I will not talk so much, I swear, because I want to hear Carlos answer this question. I want to hear Radcliffe answer this question. I've started going to the gym again. Now that I got my cootie shots. I don't know what anybody else is doing, but I found the place where I could be a gym rat in a corner and nobody will bother me. Because I lost muscle tone when before the pandemic started. I had really started going to the gym, and and then I just sort of let go. What I also started doing, but I haven't done, because my practice has become my leisure, like my place of refuge. Where before it was my place of like, now it's like, I'm in a calm place with my practice now. I'm not so angry. Although it may not seem like it. But I took up gardening, and the gardening changed my work. And if you see the new stuff, those weird mutations, I haven't put my hand in the soil in like about 7 or 8 months, because my schedule has just been out of control, crazy. Like I can't commit. I'll wreck whatever I put in the ground because I won't be around it long enough. But I yearn for that. I'm really, really missing getting my hands dirty. So yeah, gardening and being a gym rat. That's me.
I've been walking a lot. I think I spend a lot of time with myself, so I meditate a little bit in my own little way. Silence is awesome. Yeah, and I listen to myself. I don't know. I think I've been more concerned with my health. I think that's one thing that's important. I don't know. At a certain age, you have to check yourself. You have to keep up with this stuff. It's not that I'm thinking about the virus or anything like that. I'm just thinking about just as we age, we don't look after ourselves. And if I don't look after myself, I won't be able to make art one day. I don't want to be pushed around and pointing out what I need to be done. I want to do it myself. So yeah.
Making a conscious effort to listen to the body. Yeah, that's dope. And Mr. Carlos?
And for me, I think what Radcliffe was saying, meditation. I got back to start doing, when I'm in critical times, meditation as a way of connecting.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Atu. I just want to thank you all and to honor your time as well, for sharing and for letting us borrow your work for just a short time. And thank you to Bob and to Shannon. And Shannon, I'll let you wrap us up here. But Bob, do you want to say anything before I turn it over to Shannon to wrap things up?
I don't have anything specific to say. It's just been a wonderful journey living with the art, getting to know the artists. And one of the things I like to do is help get people started collecting art. So you can collect art for very little money. You can collect art that costs a lot of money, but it's still the same thrill and the same passion. So get involved and start buying some pictures, everybody. These people need to eat. If Beethoven wrote a symphony and you didn't buy a ticket to Carnegie Hall, there would be no symphony. He wouldn't be playing, and none of this would happen. So, in a sense, I mean, while I feel that I play the smallest part, maybe as the collector, you complete the circle, or you complete the chain of events. That the picture has a home and has somebody who loves it. And the amazing thing is that having owned Radcliffe's and Carlos's and Wanda's work for years, hearing that every time I hear them speak, I pick up a few more pointers. And, you know, the artist doesn't necessarily own the interpretation of the work. Once the work is done, it's its own entity. And just because Carlos may say it's about this, it doesn't mean necessarily that he's right or that he owns the interpretation. Maybe, you know, maybe he thinks it's something. If I paint a flag red and I say that's green, well, it's red. It's, you know, so I forgot where I was going with that point, but you know, they create a piece of art, it goes into the world, and it's nice to give it a home and enjoy it and learn more about it, learn more about when the artists talk about their lives and connect things, and learn about it. And when they also talk about art history, and sometimes we as the collector or curator may see art historical things in it that the artist didn't realize, but through the years of schooling is just so embedded in them. So buy some pictures, all right? To the people who are already out in the world.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure.
And Shannon, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Judy, and thank you, Bob. And again, my gratitude for your generosity of sharing these beloved works. This show has been tremendous for me in my journey of constantly learning. I have learned from Radcliffe, Carlos, and Wanda, and I'm grateful for it. And I thank you for making the objects you make and for putting them in the world and in our hands to care for. So thank you so much for your generosity of time, thought, creativity, and sharing it with us. I wish everyone a happy holiday and go see the show.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Okay.
Yes, happy
Buenas
Hanukkah.
noches.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.